So we're here because of the South Fork of the Salmon River. So the South Fork of the Salmon River is an incredible resource for folks in Idaho and beyond. In central Idaho, it's a major tributary to the Salmon River, the wild and scenic Salmon River that a lot of folks know. I think we should speak to, just because yesterday was Indigenous Peoples Day, we should recognize that this river, the South Fork of the Salmon, has been a really important cultural resource for the Nez Perce tribe since time immemorial. They hunted and gathered and fished for Chinook salmon and steelhead along this river corridor for quite a long time. And so this river is important not only to recreational users that use it now, but it has been an important cultural resource for thousands of years. So tonight, just as a brief overview, we're talking about the Stibnite Gold Project, which is a large-scale gold mine proposed in the headwaters of the South Fork of the Salmon River, specifically on the East Fork of the South Fork Salmon River. There is a public comment opportunity open right now, and this is really your chance to weigh in as a concerned citizen and let the Forest Service and other policymakers know that you value this river corridor and that you're concerned about the project as proposed. So how we're gonna kind of run the program tonight, now that we know why we're here, is we are gonna speak first to a bit of the values of the river corridor, hear from some of our special guests, and then we're gonna dive into what we have found in the draft environmental impact statement that was recently released in terms of how the Stibnite Gold Project potentially will affect those values. And then from there, we'll talk about the action piece, and that's how to submit public comment, which is probably the most important takeaway from tonight. From here, what we'd love to do is talk about this incredible place. And so we're gonna start with Thad Robison. And so I'm gonna pass it over to Thad here, and bear with us as we get our technical situation ready to go. And we'll unmute Thad and pass it over to him. So Thad, thanks for being here. And so excited to hear from you. And I'll just let you take it away. Just let us know how you know this place, and yeah, share a little bit.
Sure. First of all, I just want to thank all of you for the opportunity to be able to speak just real briefly on an area that is so near and dear to me. Just to give you a quick history about my interaction with that area. You know, I wasn't introduced to this area until just a couple of years ago. So, and when I first arrived there, I was just completely blown away. I'm a fly fisherman, a conservationist, and this area, when I found out what was happening in this area, the alarm kind of went off. You know, I've traveled all around the world. In fact, I've fly fished, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of different places on every continent, basically, except for Antarctica, which I'm still trying to get to one day. But as I've traveled around the world and spent a lot of time in some of the most incredibly majestic and scenic places around the world, this place really affected me to the core. And, you know, for a bunch of different reasons. I mean, just the wildness of it. You know, it's definitely some place that's not easy to get to. If you're going into this region of the East Fork of the South Fork of the Salmon, it's a place where you've got to be committed to go, because it definitely, it's a jaunt to be able to get there. And when I started seeing the proposals of, in the draft, the environmental impact study, and seeing how much traffic is going to be now going into that area from the mining company, it's heartbreaking, actually. One of the reasons why I love this area so much, it's one of the few places in the United States where you can go where there is a stronghold of successfully spawning bull trout. And the bull trout there, yeah, it's almost hard for me to talk about this, because within the fly fishing community, this place is really a secret. And if any of you fly fish, you know that you're not supposed to hotspot any place that you go where the fish are really big. But the reason why I have chosen to do this too is because what is at stake here is so important that we basically could lose everything in that area. So it's very important. I think that everybody who is watching this, I would urge you to please go to the Idaho Rivers United site and to click on the link that has the draft environmental impact statement. It's rather large, but if you're a fisherman, I think it's in section 3.14, I think is where you're going to want to start looking at what is going to be impacted if this mine does indeed go through as proposed. You know, with this, I'm just going to be real quick. I'll share a couple of photos from the area. Let's see, share my screen. And I'll show you why this area is so special to me. This is honestly, this is an average bull trout that you're going to see in certain areas along the East Fork of the South Fork of the Salmon. And we try to treat these fish with as much respect as we can, because like I say, you know, there's very few places where you can find fish like this, a bull trout like this. Let's see if I can go to the next screen. The other reason is just when you look at how gorgeous this river is, you can see with this steep gradient that's going down into the rivers are just lush and green. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. You know, bears, you know, the wildlife that inhabits this area, you know, we're basically guests in their home while we're there, and it needs to be treated that way. I've seen a lot of bears as I've gone through this area. A lot of these deep runs in these holes. I mean, this to me just, you know, makes my mouth water when I come across a hole like that and know that, you know, not only are bull trout in there, but you have the opportunity to see like Chinook salmon, steelhead, and the West Slope cutthroat trout. So this is, you're going to see a few pictures of me and my son. Because he's my fishing buddy, and this is another reason why it's so important for me to kind of stand up for this area, because I think it's really important that we're able to pass the torch down to the future generations that are coming up, that we still have a place like this that is made available to them long after I'm gone. So this is my son Jake. This is a bull trout that he got a couple of years ago in this area. You know, you can just see by the sheer size. I mean, the East Fork and the South Fork of the Salmon is not notoriously a large river. It's actually, you know, it's pretty small. And when you see the size of the fish that call this part of the river home, it's absolutely mind-blowing. Sorry, I got a dog in the background there. This is, I think this is just where Johnson Creek comes into the river here. And you can just see why this place is so special as we go through these. I talked earlier about, you know, West Slope cutthroat trout. You know, all these wild fish that are in this area. This is one of my, I love this shot here. That's my son that's out there casting. And this is in Johnson Creek. And Johnson Creek is an area that in the proposed plan where they're planning on moving a lot of heavy equipment through, and the sedimentation that's going to happen in this area. And this is a critical habitat spawning area for the Chinook as well. The Chinook come up this Johnson Creek up here to spawn. As a shot from this year, actually, when I was up there, and this is the glory hole. This is where the proposed mine, they're going to drain that lake and expand the pit mine in this area right here. You know, you're right on the footsteps of the Frank Church Wilderness area, which is one of the most incredible places that we have in the lower 48. I mean, if you ever get an opportunity to go there, it's incredible. This is the East Fork of the South Fork of the Salmon. I just wanted to put this picture in here to kind of give a scale, you know, of what you're looking at on the size and kind of the water depth. And as Reese gets in a little bit later this evening about the impacts that are going to happen, one of the big concerns we have is with the rise in the water temperatures that's going to happen. And when you're looking at a piece of water that's this small, and you're going to be subjecting it to the harms that are going to come from the mining that will be happening literally not more than a mile upstream of where this river, where this photo was taken in the river, you know, it's such sensitive habitat, and bull trout, you know, they're kind of a barometer, like a canary in the coal mine of you know, the health and the ecosystem of that river. Very, very sensitive to water temperature. And if you know, water temperature, there's not a lot of room that we have in there before that it would absolutely be devastating to the bull trout. So my son again with another, you know, bull trout. Like I say, this is my buddy Derek. You know, that's about a 28-inch bull trout that was in that area there too. I did want to show this picture here too, because one of the concerns that I have, you know, with the influx of the amount of equipment and people that would be going into this area is there's also a risk of, there's a greater increase in the risk of wildfires in this area. This one here was from the fire that occurred in the area a few years ago, and this is the landslide that happened because of that fire that actually went over the river. If you kind of look off to the side, to the right of that pine tree, that's my son over there standing, you know, walking down. The river is actually underneath his feet right there. And this is another shot. You can see a little bit of the water that's in there. So the fact that, you know, a mining company is going to come in there with a large workforce, the risk of fires increasing in that area dramatically goes up just because we have the number of people that are going in that area. So, you know, another bull trout, I think I'm getting to the last couple of them, trying to get through these here, but, you know, when you just see that photo right there, when I just look at how thick that fish is in such a small river, it's an incredible place, and it's definitely a place where we need to take some time to evaluate really what's going on. And with that, I will turn it back over to you guys.
Thanks so much, Thad. Oh my gosh. Some of those photos of fish is just like takes your breath away. So, and very much appreciate you. You know, I can understand how it's certainly hard to you know, share kind of the secret spot, the honey hole a little bit. But I think, you know, to speak to the larger group here a little bit, why is, you know, we'll get into the specifics of the Stibnite Gold Project, but we, as an organization, Idaho Rivers United, and our partner organizations and concerned citizens, we want people to know how special this place is, and that way we can protect it from the adverse impacts of a large-scale gold mining proposal. So thanks so much for sharing that. And so, yeah, I guess I can speak a little bit to you know, the fisheries values in that area in terms of the history, in addition to what Thad shared. So if you go on the Forest Service website, you can find there that they say the South Fork Salmon River contains the most important remaining habitat for summer Chinook salmon in the Columbia River Basin. The fish were once the largest, most valuable segment of the world's largest runs of Chinook salmon. And so it's to no surprise that the Nez Perce tribe places so much cultural value into this arena, and that's because of the abundance that was once there. And as Thad has showed us through these photos, is the fish are certainly still there. And so we'll talk a little bit about why we think that's a little bit different from the narrative that we sometimes hear about this area being very heavily degraded, and you know, that the fishery has been so heavily impacted. But as we've seen through these photos from Thad, there are still some big fish holding up there in the East Fork of the South Fork, just downstream of the mine site. So, so thanks so much, Thad. That was really informative. I'd also love to hear a little bit about and share with folks a bit about some other values of this river corridor from the recreational perspective. So the East Fork of the South Fork and the South Fork of the Salmon River are world renowned in terms of what they have to offer as whitewater rivers. People travel in to visit this river corridor, and it's becoming more and more well known in terms of its whitewater values. And so I would love to engage Zach here and maybe ask him a couple of questions, because Zach Sears, who's one of our guests tonight, you know, he and also Ben Stokesbury, they, you know, traveled throughout the world on expedition kayaking trips, but this river seems to really tug their heartstrings when they've heard about the potential impacts from the Stibnite Gold Project. So I'm gonna spotlight Zach here and let him speak a little bit to the value of the river corridor. So Zach, there you are. Okay. Zach,
Hello.
I would just love to know from you, what makes the South Fork of the Salmon so special?
Sure. Yeah, it's a longer river. We typically put in at the confluence of the Seasash, so we're running the lower 36 miles, which is essentially roadless. And so, outside of being a wilderness experience, it has some of the best whitewater that I've ever run, both at high and low water. The river really starts to open up to river runners in late February. If you can tear yourself away from skis, it's happening down there. And then we see rising flows sometimes in March, but April and May it's really high, and it can offer big water, class 5 to those seeking that. And then later in the summer we can start bringing oar rigs in there, bigger boats, inflatable rafts, and catarafts, and it's still world class in my opinion. So just the length of the season, the nature of the trip being wilderness, it's pretty unparalleled in this area.
Yeah. I mean, I can say, I've wanted to go down into the South Fork corridor and haven't been down there yet. For me, I've only been on the East Fork of the South Fork, but I do know, we've been seeing more people. I feel like more people talking about the South Fork of the Salmon, and I would love to hear from you. Maybe in terms of what you've seen in changes in use of the river corridor. Are there more people paddling the South Fork of the Salmon every year, or what have you seen as the trend?
Sure. Yeah. So I first started paddling the South Fork 15 years ago, and there's been a noticeable increase in users down there in the paddle sports world. It's hard to really give you hard numbers about the users, but I estimate that there's somewhere in between 300 and 500 users in there, or paddlers, or people, members of our user group in there every year. This year, after the shelter in place, the river was closed. And in the first 10 days of its reopening, I counted at the put-in 70 people, which was just, I've never seen a spring quite like that. And if you were to go down there on the 4th of July weekend, chances of seeing 10 to 15 rafts at the put-in is pretty high. And you talk to some of the old river runners that have been down here since the early 80s, and they'd go an entire season without seeing another paddler. So things have changed quite a bit.
Yeah, no kidding. And so I've heard a lot of people refer to it as kind of like the how would you put it? But sort of like the little brother, maybe the big brother to the Middle Fork of the Salmon. It doesn't quite get the same national attention as the Middle Fork of the Salmon, because the Middle Fork is this 100-mile, it's wild and scenic designated. It's within the Frank Church Wilderness area. And so how would you, we might have some folks on here that haven't been on the South Fork, but have maybe been on a Middle Fork trip or are familiar. How would you compare it to the Middle Fork of the Salmon?
Yeah, I actually love that comparison, because they're so similar. When you look at a map of Idaho, the South Salmon, the Middle Fork, and the main salmon are all flowing north, paralleling one another. And a lot of the geologic features that you see in each one of those, with the exception of maybe the main over by Chalice, are really similar. And so putting in at the Seasash, to me, feels a lot like putting in somewhere at Haystack on the Middle Fork, right when you enter Impassable Canyon. And there's 50 plus miles of world-class river above the normal put-in that just never gets run these days. And I imagine that someday in the future we're going to be putting in at Stoley Meadows more, just because there's just that much more. And if you head up the East Fork, you're talking about a legendary section in of itself, and even Johnson Creek, which is really rarely run, but it is also world class. I mean, just the whole watershed is just a paradise for paddle sports, and not to mention the the camping down there is just incredible, as we all know. Just whether it's truck camping or on the river, it really feels like a gateway to this to the Frank. It's this buffer in between Valley County and the Frank that I think is really important to, you know, help maintain the integrity of the wilderness itself.
Yeah. Can you tell me about the East Fork or the South Fork, like where that is in relation to the stretch downstream of the confluence of the CSASH? Maybe like in relation to Yellow Pine or the site, the proposed site for Stibnite Gold Project?
Sure. Yeah, Yellow Pine is in a pretty weird place. Unless you know Idaho well, it's kind of hard to pinpoint it, but it's at the confluence of the Upper East Fork and Johnson Creek, and about 15 miles downstream is the confluence of the CSASH East Fork and CSASH rivers. So, you know, overall, it's this great confluence, and if you've never been there, it's a really powerful place. And just upstream of town on the East Fork of the South Fork, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 10 miles to 15 miles up there. The mine exists, and you know, if you've ever visited the mine, you can literally drive to the wilderness boundary and look down on Indian Creek. If you fly into the Middle Fork, that's where you're going to be. They recently put a cell phone tower at the mine that's on the ridge looking straight down Indian Creek. I wouldn't be surprised if you might get a weak signal at the Indian Creek airstrip these days. So it's an extremely sensitive place. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that speaks to it. Thanks so much for kind of orienting us. I'll share a map here with folks in a little bit to show exactly where it is we're talking about for folks that aren't familiar. But yeah, I mean, that's such a great overview in terms of the values of that river corridor for folks that know it, and then also for folks that don't know it. How about from maybe we could hear from Ben too, you know, see if he has anything to add in terms of the whitewater values or what makes this place special. So Ben, I've got you highlighted, and I'm gonna ask to unmute you.
Yeah. Well, I certainly can just sit back and listen to both Thad and Zach speak so eloquently about this place. I guess I'm more in Thad's category in terms of I've just recently found this river, luckily through a great guide in terms of Zach Sears, and just getting more in touch with, yes, you know, like the reason why I'm initially so inspired about this place is because of the whitewater. You know, I think when all's told, you have even more runnable gradient when you take into account, say, the upper stretches of the South Fork or the upper stretches of the East Fork, South Fork, or the CSASH that is becoming more and more commonly run. When you talk about the gradient, which is really the quantity, can be thought about in terms of the quantity of whitewater. You have just as much quantity of whitewater, if not even more, on the South Fork of the Salmon than you do on the Middle Fork of the Salmon. So two things there. For the whitewater enthusiast, that means that this place is as special or even more special than one of the most sought after river trips in the United States in the Middle Fork by comparison. Now there's other things going on, of course, but on the other hand too, it means that there's more rapids, there's more challenge there. So it eliminates a bit of the user group that can utilize the Middle Fork. That being said, at certain times of year, just like Zach pointed out, this river is good for a huge swath of our user group. You know, you can put people in rafts, you can put people in pack rafts, and so in that way, it's just so accessible. And again, like the way that I'm thinking about this, and I think the way that this river will be considered in the future, and hopefully a future that's devoid of a massive open pit mine, is that it is if not equivalent, and a major, certainly a major wilderness complement to the wilderness, Frank Church Wilderness itself, and something that should be valued just as much as the Middle Fork. And again, like, I think all of us, before this mine really popped onto our radar, all of us are hesitant to be like, go there, experience this place. We have to save it because it is so precious. And the time in the wilderness, for me at least, it is so precious, is the time when you're with a small group or even alone and experiencing that place. So I think that is the testament to how great the risk is to this place. And yeah, I mean, it's just, it really has been mind-blowing to not only see it at these levels that make it some of the biggest whitewater on earth in the heart of the spring, but also having seen it at its crystal clear winter runoff, finest scenery. I can only imagine the fishing. Yeah, I'll go on, but I should stop there.
Thanks so much, Ben. Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's just, again, speaks to the values of this place. And, we hope more people get out to enjoy this river corridor. And because it really is a unique, special asset that we have available to us on public land with great camping, amazing whitewater, and incredible fishing, as we've seen. So before we dive into the boring stuff of the draft environmental impact statement and the gold mine as proposed, the Stibnite Gold Project, I think I'd maybe just love to ask our guests here, being Thad and Ben and Zach, why you're engaging in this issue. Just if you could, and just a quick brief. So maybe we'll start with Thad, and then we'll go to Zach and then Ben.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, it broke up a little bit.
Yeah, no problem. So I guess the question would be is, we saw why this place is so incredible, but I guess, the question is why are you concerned about this project? Why are you engaging in this issue now?
Well, one reason why is because I never run into an area where they put a giant open pit mine and everybody has been like, wow, that's the greatest thing that's ever happened. And look how much better we are now with this big mine than we were before. So, that's one thing. And when you see the size, with the time that I've spent in that area, and there's at Stibnite with the glory, we call it the glory hole there. You've got that one mine there, and the tailings are going through. And then when you see the vastness of the size that Midas Gold is proposing to expand this area, not only in the pit, the existing pit, but also with the new pit that is being designated. And that there's this kind of, I don't even know how to explain it. In their restoration process of this, they're gonna, and I know that Reese, you're gonna talk about this probably a little bit, where they're going under the guise of the fact that they're going to be restoring this area. And I just don't see how you can restore an area when you're talking about building a 465-foot slurry tailings dam in Meadow Creek. I don't see how you're restoring an area where you're blasting over a mile of rock to build a tunnel that you somehow think that these Chinook and the bull trout and everything else are going to swim through the void to get further upstream. It's never been proven that it can happen, and it won't. So, the fact that even what Zach and Ben were talking about as well, that there is such a personal level that once you experience an area like this, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be this area. Everybody that's been on this caller has been out, whether you're a kayaker or a paddler or a fly fisherman, or you hike or camp or hunt. The importance of when you see a place like this, how important it is, not just for yourself, because the first thing we want to do is we kind of want to be selfish and kind of be like, keep this place to ourselves. But that's kind of the wrong attitude. You want to be able to share, and like Ben was saying, you go with smaller people into these areas and they're able to see and experience a place that there's very few places like this that are left, especially for us, down here, we're all south of Alaska, and I've spent a lot of time on the main stem of the salmon, steelhead fishing. But when I go into this yellow pine area, and literally on the footsteps of the church, of the Frank Church Wilderness right there, and you're blown away with the majesty that's there. Even the fact that we have this mine that's still not functioning right now as a mine that has been left there when it first started in the late 20s or the 30s, and they kind of went through and did what they could. Let's leave this place alone. Let's let this place, let's help restore the damage that's already been done to reach its full potential, as opposed to going in there and literally taking 13,000 acres of wilderness and turning it into just utter an eyesore, and the pollution. And I really want to encourage people that are listening to this. We do need to make our voices known to the Forest Service, because there are so many things that have not been taken into account that are being looked at from a slanted or a one-sided lens that's coming through. When the fact that when you see the size of those bull trout that are in there, that's not a one-time occurrence. And I haven't been going there all my life, but I've been going there several years, and I have seen those fish every time. And in fact, there's even rumors of bigger fish, where the bull trout can even reach up to 40 inches. And I don't know if you guys can put that into perspective, but as a steelhead fisherman myself too, I've never caught a steelhead over 40 inches or even close to 40 inches. And I'm watching my son catch 34-inch bull trout and getting 30-inch bull trout in this area that is so important to protect. And the other thing is, with the Chinook, because at the time of year when I'm there, the Chinook are starting to come up that river as well. And we won't ever target those fish, but when you see those fish, you literally just put your rod down. And I've spent countless hours on the riverbank just watching the Chinook. When you see one, it literally stops you dead in your tracks. I mean, they're extremely obvious. They look very different from the bull trout. And the fact that Chinook has swam close to 900 miles from the ocean into Idaho, into the footsteps of the Frank Church, central Idaho, no less, has traversed 7 dams to get through there, and everything else that they've had to go through to be able to complete their life cycle. When you sit down and you just watch, I saw probably 24 Chinook salmon this last year while I was up there. It was the most Chinook that I'd ever seen going up there at a single time and watching those fish. So, it's there's just the opportunities that are there for anybody to go in and enjoy, because this doesn't belong to me. This doesn't belong, to Ben or to Zach or to Reese or anybody else. This area belongs to everybody, and there's a significant amount of public access that that land belongs to us. It doesn't belong to Midas. It doesn't belong to, government. I mean, they want to pretend like it does, but let's be honest, it belongs to us, we the people. So, and the fact that they're going to want to close that off, not to mention the situation with the indigenous tribes that are going on there and the different treaties now that are being broken, it literally, I get a little worked up, sorry. So, that's, and we need to be able to pass this down to future generations, and everybody's children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews need to have an opportunity to go and whitewater raft in this area, or fish in this area, or hike and camp in this area. And that's being threatened right now. And so I take that very personally, for the fact that it's not just impacting me personally, it's impacting my family, my friends, and all of the strangers out there that I don't know that I wave to as we go down the road, because everybody up there waves, when you go down the road up there. and you know, there's a community up there, and you know, there's a different sense of culture even when you go into that area, and you can feel it when you go in, because it is so wild, and it's something that we definitely need to have everybody that we can become involved and know about this project. So
thanks so much, Thad. Yeah, that's just awesome summary of why should we care and what's at stake. So Zach or Ben, do you guys have anything to add to that?
Sure. I just real quickly, you know, I feel like my time spent down there does a lot more for me than my health insurance does, and so, you know, in that way, I'm greatly concerned that I won't have this connection to the earth that I once had if the river system becomes as impaired as it would be if this project goes through. And just real quick, one of the things I'm looking at as a recreationalist is that, you know, the forest plan that our community signed in 2003, basically, you know, the Forest Service promised us that any project like this would not degrade the environment for more than 3 years. And one of the amendments is that this project will be allowed to degrade this environment for 20 plus years. It's just too much time. We can't accept that, and we don't have to too, because they need us to basically sign a new forest plan or just allow them to change the forest plan that we already agreed upon. And then the last thing I find is worth mentioning is that, to quote the executive summary from the DEIS, they state that the environmental monitoring and maintenance phase would continue for as long as needed to demonstrate that the site has been fully reclaimed. And that sounds kind of good, but when you deconstruct it, to me, it just sounds like they're going to just let it, you know, remain unfixed for as long as they feel like it. It's just a hall pass for destroying this place and walking away. And yeah, we don't have to let that happen. So that's what I got.
Thanks so much, Zach. Ben, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'm engaged in this because I have absolutely no faith that this is in any way, shape, or form even close to a restoration project, which is absolutely how it was sold to us initially, as a restoration of a historic mining site. And this draft environmental impact statement, I think, is proof, absolute irrefutable proof, that what they tried to sell to us in terms of economic benefit and environmental restoration is in a lot of ways being written a completely different way. It's, as Zach said, these effects and the cleanup can go on now in perpetuity. The footprint, I believe, since the first proposal to what we have on the table now has grown considerably. I think that was one of the most recent pieces of news, that it's going to grow and consume far more than 1,200 acres of virgin terrain that's never been touched before. And I'll never forget the first time reaching the confluence with the main salmon, the South Fork salmon and the main salmon, and just seeing, and at that point, the river was extremely high, the highest level I'd ever seen it. And it was many degrees cleaner water than what was in the main salmon at that point. So you're taking this incredible, relatively clean to any other stream that, you put it up against the United States, and you put it in jeopardy of degradation for all of these reasons, like, yeah, it's got me wanting to do absolutely as much as I possibly can to try and stop this mine project, this Stibnite mine project.
Thanks so much, Ben. Yeah, so I mean, gosh, the passion that you can hear in these guys' voices is pretty incredible, considering, you know, I think too, you know, Ben and Zach and Thad are guys that travel throughout the world to these incredible places, and you know, the fact that this place, the East Fork of the South Fork of the Salmon River corridor, means so much to them, really speaks to how special this place is. So I think from here, folks, hopefully you're sticking with us. We are going to dive into a little bit of what the Stibnite Gold Project is proposing to do. And so I'm going to, let's see here, I'm going to try to share my screen so that I can bring up a map to show you guys, you all. So let's see if I'm able to do that. Okay. Okay, great. So I'm just going to bring up a map here for folks that don't know this place too well, and we've heard, you know, a little bit about what's at stake, but I would love to talk a little bit about what Midas Gold Corporation is proposing for their project. So here's the town of Yellow Pine that we heard about. This is Johnson Creek, a tributary into the East Fork of the South Fork Salmon River. And then running basically from east to west is the East Fork of the South Fork. So I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see where we are on the planet in Idaho. So there's Boise down there in the bottom left. So that's where we are. Zooming in. Okay, so let's head upstream about a little over 10 miles up to the project site. So as you folks may know, this is a historically impacted area. There's a long history, which you can read about on Idaho Rivers United website, about the history of mining in this area. So basically, Midas Gold Corporation is a corporation from Canada. They have offices here, Midas Gold Idaho, based in Idaho. And they're proposing to open up a gold, silver, and antimony mine here on the upper. This is the East Fork of the South Fork where my cursor is. And they're proposing to remine this area to extract roughly 5 million ounces of gold. Their plan is to, here's the Yellow Pine pit, or the glory hole that we heard Thad talk about. Their proposal is to expand the Yellow Pine pit and extract gold from the Yellow Pine pit, extract gold from another pit up here called the West End, and then dig a new pit over in this area called the Hanger Flats. And so you heard Thad talk about a place called the Meadow Creek Valley. And so I just want to put in perspective where that is. So here is, you know, basically the project area where Midas Gold has their private mining claims and also unpatented mining claims, meaning they own the surface minerals, but it's Forest Service public land. So this area here where my cursor is called the Meadow Creek. It is designated critical habitat for bull trout and Chinook salmon. Right now, Chinook salmon are blocked from fish passage from that big Yellow Pine pit downstream. But as of right now, this is totally intact habitat right now. So this is in great shape. If we get fish back there, they're going to be really happy because this is unimpacted, undisturbed landscape. So one of the major project impacts that we're looking at is with these large scale mining projects, an open pit mining project where they dig a large pit in the earth to process the ore using cyanide leach processes in basically an enclosed facility on site here. They have to put all of that waste that is contaminated with cyanide and heavy metals and store it somewhere. And so the proposal for Midas Gold as proposed, an alternative to, which is their preferred alternative, is to store 100 million tons of contaminated mining waste, burying the entirety of Meadow Creek Valley, and constructing a 450-foot high dam to hold those tailings in place at the top of the watershed. And so that's just a little peek into the scale of the project. One of the major concerns is that, with that amount of waste, even with the best structural designs to keep that waste in place, is that history has shown that the majority of gold mines in particular have accidental spills and leaks of contaminants. So any of those contaminants that reach into the East Fork or the South Fork would inevitably travel downstream the river corridor to these places that we heard Thad and Zach and Ben speak to in terms of their values from a recreational perspective, a fisheries and wildlife perspective, indigenous cultural perspective. So Midas's proposal basically would require what they call an operations boundary. And so Midas Gold owns pieces of private land here in this area. They have patented mining claims, meaning they own the land. But surrounding those small patented mining claims is land owned by you and I. It's Payette National Forest, it's public land. So the project footprint in terms of disturbance will disturb 3,500 acres of public land, the majority of which is currently undisturbed. An example right here is the Fiddle Creek drainage, and their proposal is to take all of the rock that they have to dig on top to get to the ore down below. They would store in Fiddle Creek here, and then again, a tailings dam up here burying the Meadow Creek Valley. The operations perimeter that will become inaccessible to the public is about 13,000 acres. So it extends way beyond just the project footprint. And this is an area that will not be accessible to the public during the life cycle of the mine, which is about a 20-year proposed life cycle. And so in terms of, again, impacts to the indigenous communities, the Nez Perce tribe in particular, is that to not be able to access some of these places that they have historically used for hunting and gathering, traditional resources, that duration, a 20-year project life cycle, represents basically a generational loss of connection and knowledge connected to the place. And so for that reason, the Nez Perce tribe has been working really diligently in opposition to this mining project as proposed. And as we zoom out here, just for a little perspective, as Zach mentioned, we're talking about a project that's right on the border of the Frank Church Wilderness. And so everything on the other side of this divide over here drains into the middle fork of the Salmon River, into the Frank Church Wilderness, River of No Return Wilderness. So I'm gonna bring up another photo here for you all to see, which is just the layout and where it is in relation, and then we're gonna talk about access to the mine site. So here we have, so up in the top right here, hopefully folks can see this okay. Maybe a thumbs up from Caitlin if you can see it. Okay, awesome. Great, so, all right, so for perspective, here's the town of McCall, Donnelly, and Cascade, Highway 55 for those that know it. So for Midas Gold to access the mine site, basically they're proposing to access it via Worm Lake Road, which is a heavily used recreational corridor. That's how a lot of anglers and whitewater paddlers access, and backcountry users, hunters, all kinds of folks just want to take their family camping at Worm Lake. So the life cycle of the project, we will see mining traffic along the road here. And so what's going to happen as Midas Gold has proposed this project, during site construction, they would use Johnson Creek Road to access the mine site. So Johnson Creek Road here heads from south to north towards the town of Yellow Pine. And then if you see where my cursor is by the town of Yellow Pine, access would be then to the east along Stibnite Road, the upper East Fork of the South Fork, up to the mine site. So thinking about the photo that Thad showed us of the confluence with Johnson Creek, so you can imagine for 2 to 3 years, the impacts on recreational users to have heavy mining traffic be traveling that corridor on a daily basis. The numbers, I think it's 45 heavy vehicles, so big industrial mining vehicles that will be traveling that corridor every day. And so if you were planning your fishing trip to go fish for bull trout in between Yellow Pine and the mine site along the East Fork of the South Fork, you'd be having to deal with big mining rigs passing by you as you're trying to enjoy your outing. So after those 2 to 3 years of project construction, the proposed access route, because Midas Gold recognized the impacts to the recreational community, there was, especially locally, a lot of folks that were concerned about the access to the site, impacts to Johnson Creek Road. And so Midas Gold is proposing to construct about 13 miles of new road through roadless areas here called the Burnt Log Route. So you can see that where my cursor is. That is the proposed access route starting about year 2 or 3 of the project. And from there, basically mining traffic, heavy mining vehicles would be traveling in and out of the mine site up here via the Burnt Log Route. Along that way, considering the impacts of building new roads in roadless areas, they would also have to cross Burnt Log Creek, which is a tributary to Johnson Creek, which is an eligible wild and scenic river for fish values. That's one of the outstandingly remarkable values that the Forest Service identified. And so, so we're very concerned as an organization about mining traffic crossing over Burnt Log Creek and wetlands and all of the water basically that heads into Johnson Creek that feeds the river that holds those massive bull trout that we saw, and also the outstanding whitewater resources downstream. So that's just a little bit of a sneak peek into the broader picture here. I'm also going to show, for reference, sorry, it's a lot of maps and such, but hopefully people are still staying with us. But so I showed you that the Google Earth shot of the mine site. This is basically just an overview of the site disturbance and infrastructure that would be needed during the project life cycle. So that is some of the visuals in brief. I guess, so here's the Yellow Pine pit, West End pit that I described. And then up here is that Meadow Creek Valley, then buried with what we call mine tailings, which is basically contaminated earth that's been mixed with cyanide and contains heavy metals that are pollutants of concern. Okay, so that's an overview of the project impacts. So just as a reminder to everybody, the reason that we're engaging in this issue right now, thank you, Reagan. That's such a poignant comment. So I should say as well that as a lot of folks probably know, Midas Gold is proposing to route the entirety of the East Fork of the South Fork Salmon River through a almost mile-long tunnel during the project life cycle. And they've done some serious engineering design to make this work for fish. The problem is that a tunnel of this length and for use of this duration has not been proven as successful. So I'm going to do just a brief overview of project-related impacts and how they will impact fish. Some of you folks may have joined Idaho Conservation League's panel that was hosted last week, which we had some experts and scientists join us. I'm certainly no scientist, but I am passionate about this issue. So I'm just going to share some of the main takeaways from the draft environmental impact statement and how maybe they relate to the values that Thad and Ben and Zach spoke to. So as we know, this is one of the most important streams for Chinook salmon in the entire Columbia Basin. So Midas Gold has proposed basically that through their project, they're going to restore fish passage to the East Fork of the South Fork Salmon River above the Yellow Pine pit, which we saw on the map, which really is, I mean, that's a great idea. And they have some very creative, interesting designs in terms of site restoration. But what we have found from the draft environmental impact statement, which took multiple agencies to analyze and design, is that the impacts to habitat is going to result even if Chinook salmon and bull trout are able to make it past the yellow pine pit, is that the impacts to surface water temperatures and to water quantity are going to result in a net loss of bull trout habitat and Chinook salmon habitat. Basically, the water is going to be too warm for Chinook salmon and for bull trout to spawn, and for juveniles basically to rear and to use that habitat up there. So what we are saying as an organization is that the project as proposed, it will not work to restore the site. It may, in the long run, it might have some visual benefits, but in terms of restoring habitat for these Endangered Species Act listed fish, it just can't be done at the scale of mining that Midas Gold is proposing. So a few of the other impacts that we're also concerned about is the creation of acid generating rock and metal leaching materials. So as the project is proposed, mining activities will create 446 million tons of potential acid generating materials, which basically acid mine drainage is a major problem for gold mines throughout North America. They impact waterways throughout the West. And so any issues related to acid mine drainage are of serious concern. And that also has to do with metal leaching materials. So the project as proposed by Midas Gold will require water treatment into perpetuity. They're proposing to basically construct a passive water treatment facility that will basically capture all of the water that's coming down through the mine site, treat it to neutralize it so that it's not full of heavy metals, and then let that continue on downstream. So like I said, tribal and recreational access will be restricted in 13,000 acres of public land in the operations area boundary for 20 years. And during the 2 to 3 years of project construction, Johnson Creek Road and then also Stibnite Road in between Yellow Pine and the project site will be traveled by heavy mining traffic containing hazardous materials. So those that have been out in Idaho's backcountry and backcountry roads, you know that these are really dynamic places. We saw Thad's photos from avalanches from a few years back. And so imagine, these, whatever safety protocols they're able to put into place, imagine heavy mining traffic trying to travel year round down these corridors that often get closed during the wintertime due to avalanches, debris flows, landslides, that kind of stuff. And again, from the recreational perspective, imagine going out to paddle on the East Fork of the South Fork or to go fishing on the East Fork of the South Fork and having to deal with that mining traffic doesn't sound too fun. So the reason that I really emphasize those the reason that I emphasize those points and the impacts to recreational users, and a big part of the reason that we've had Thad and Zach and Ben speak to that is because the draft environmental impact statement that is supposed to account for impacts to the users of an area, assess and analyze and compare the alternatives for environmental impacts. In terms of recreational use, anglers and paddlers in particular were pretty much completely ignored from that analysis. Zach did kind of speak to a little bit the challenges in terms of gathering data around recreational use that it's hard to put a number to. But we are quite disappointed that the Forest Service, after many years of having the opportunity to prepare this really lengthy document, the fact that recreational users were pretty much entirely disregarded. And so for you folks that are watching here, I hope that that what we've heard in terms of the values of the place really gets you excited to participate, and let the Forest Service know that they did not do a great job in terms of making sure that the impacts to this area and how it affects you in particular was assessed. And so I think from here, there's a lot of other specific areas that we can get into in terms of project impacts of the Stibnite Gold Project. But I think what would be most beneficial is we talk about how to put this into action, because we've heard basically what the value of the area is. we know how a little bit about the threat to the area, and now we need to know how to take action. So I'm going to pass it over to Ren, and she's going to talk about the public comment opportunity that we have, how you can use some of the resources that Idaho Rivers United has, and because we want to make sure that, you know, first and foremost, that folks that are interested in this issue, that you have the facts and information in front of you to make your own decision about the project. You know, being here, we're not saying that you have to say that you oppose the Stibnite Gold Project, but you might be concerned about what the alternative that they're proposing. And you might say, hey, this is actually really going to impact me. I hadn't thought about that before. And I'm ready to weigh in on this project and submit public comment. So let's see here. I'm going to pass it over to Ren, and she's going to talk about the public comment opportunity and how to do that. So here we go, spotlighting Ren.
Thanks, Reese. Okay, so I just want to take a couple minutes. I'll try to keep it pretty short. Just to talk a little bit about what public comment is and why it's so important that we engage in this process right now. So first of all, public comment is a part of the NEPA process. So it's really an opportunity given to us as citizens through the National Environmental Policy Act to review and make comments and weigh in on policy and projects that are proposed. It really is an amazing chance that you have to really get into voicing your concerns on our natural resource management and to point out things that were missed in an EIS or you know, in an EA and environmental analysis or environmental impact statement. And it's really important that we get involved in it because it's often foundational for challenging a record of decision when it comes to holding agencies accountable with projects like this. So doing it right is the hard part because the ugly truth is that the vast majority of public comments just get thrown out. And the reason for that is that they don't meet specific criteria. There is specific criteria that is laid out in NEPA that you need to meet in order for your comments to be considered in the analysis process. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quick so that we can kind of talk about what those specific things are. So, okay. And everybody see that? You guys see that? Can I get a thumbs up? Okay, cool. All right, so the biggest thing is what makes good public comment. And the key word is substantive. And so that is what NEPA uses, the NEPA policy handbook uses to describe what makes effective public comment that must be considered. So if you make an effective substantive public comment, there's a legal obligation for agencies to consider it and to respond. And so what defines a substantive comment is that it's related, it's focused on specifics, it provides alternatives, points out weaknesses or oversights or ineffective strategies, and uses data to support major points. Really important, and we will send an email out with all of this information as well as like some guides and things to help you through writing your comment because we don't want your comments to get thrown out. We want your comments to be considered by the Forest Service because it's really important that your voice is heard, but your voice will not be heard really and put into the Federal Register if you don't meet the criteria. So that's kind of the overview of what a substantive comment is. So for examples, I always find the opposite of it to be helpful to kind of look at what non-substantive comment is. So comments that are in favor or against the project without reasoning supported by data or facts. So if you say something like, we disagree with alternative 2 and believe you should select alternative 3, but don't provide information or data on why they should choose alternative 3, then it's not considered a substantive comment. Comments that only agree or disagree with the policy or resource decisions without justification or supporting data. So if you just say less mining should be permitted, that isn't enough. You need to say why less mining needs to be permitted. Comments that don't pertain to the project area or project. So project relates to mining and you're making comments about grazing. It's going to get thrown So it does need to be specific to the project and specific to the impacts of the project or to the process of the EIS development. And then comments that take the form of vague, open-ended questions. You can ask questions in your public comment, but they can't really be vague or open-ended. They need to be pretty specific. So when you make a public comment, some of the things you really want to include, you want to make sure that it's unique. So if I write a public comment, let's say that Reese and I sit down and we write this public comment together and we submit the exact same public comment to the Forest Service, that's going to be considered one comment. It won't be considered, you know, Ren's comment and Reese's comment. It'll just be considered one comment. So it's really important that you take a little bit of time to make your comments unique. We're going to send you guys a link to a letter that will help you get started on your public comment, but we encourage you to put as much information as you can in there to make it unique to your concerns and unique to the things that you want more information about with the Forest Service or feel the Forest Service needs to spend more time considering or evaluating. You need to include why. So supported by or based on data and facts and studies. Include critiques based on facts. So you can critique the fact that the DEIS doesn't include anything on recreation, that it doesn't include the recreation economy, that it really is a reduction in habitat for ESA listed species. So oversight, so things that they didn't consider, and any issues. So those are things to really focus on when you write your public comment. We are absolutely here to help. We have a section of our website that's completely committed to just dedicated to helping you write effective public comment. It's our advocacy page. So that's the website. It's just idahorivers.org/advocacy. It's called our River Rats page. And there's a lot of information on there. We are going to send you an email with an info sheet, and we'll include some links to comment, a letter to help you get started, and links to advocacy resources, just to kind of show you a little bit of what we have on our River Rats page. So if you go in, you can find it right here. It's just advocacy, River Rats, so it's underneath take action. And you can find some of the major issues that are going on right now and how to get involved. And then if you scroll down to the bottom, that's where most of our resources are. So if you go into our advocacy resources, you'll actually find, we actually have like a public comment 101, which is a whole document on what is public comment, what role does it play, and how to write an effective public comment. And so if you really want to get into it, you can dig into that. There's also information for if you want to contact your policymakers. And then we also have a series of videos as well that are just short 3 to 5 minute videos that kind of talk about the different aspects of public comment. So if you want to make sure that your public comment meets the criteria, we encourage you to get in here, look at some of these resources, and really be able to check off, yes, you know, my public comment does include information. And we also are going to send you a fact sheet, and you're welcome to use, we encourage you to take any information in that fact sheet to use in your public comment. So yeah, I'm so excited that all of you guys are here to learn more about this project, and really hope that you take some time to submit your comment. We'll send you a link. I think there's already one probably in the chat on where to go to comment. It's the cara.ecosystemmanagement.org link. And then we'll also send you the follow-up as well. And I think that's all we got. So
that was great. I mean, it's hard, you know, it can be really intimidating in terms of how to navigate, you know, the Forest Service website and figure out where to submit comment and what to include there. And so that's why Ren has, you know, prepared these amazing resources. We want to make it as easy as possible for folks. And I just love to emphasize again, you know, the importance of telling your story. I've seen some folks have dropped in the chat box some things about, you know, the bull trout they caught with their child, you know, in years past, those sorts of things. Make sure to include that and personalize your letter and demonstrate, you know, to decision makers that that you've been ignored in this analysis, and your voice needs to be heard. So we really appreciate that. We promised we'd leave some time to answer some questions. So some questions have probably been asked and maybe been lost up there in the chat box. But if anybody has a pressing question, please, you know, drop it in there. We'll do our best to answer it answer it for you. If you have it for a particular person that has spoken tonight, just make sure to, to let us know who you're addressing the question towards. And like Ren said, we're going to follow up with sort of a quick fact sheet with some of the items that we've talked about to get into kind of the technical details of specific impacts from the project. And we'll make sure to provide all those resources for folks. So if you have any questions, drop them in there now. Otherwise, I encourage you to get to work and start writing those comments. So we'll give just a few moments here. And that goes for, Thad and Zach and Ben. If you guys have any questions for the IRU staff or the public comment process, feel free to ask away as well.
I have a question. I went to the legislature, the Idaho legislature page, and I was looking to see which legislatures who represent the area. I guess it's saying it's Section 8, which includes Valley, Custer, Lemhi, and Boise counties, it looks like. And I've talked to Reese about this in the past, but with some of the work that I've done in the past with the Pebble Mine project that has been going on in Bristol Bay, I sent a lot of letters to the different government officials, including the governor, of Alaska, and the legislatures that are up there. And I just want to make sure that I've got the legislatures' names for those areas. And I don't know if you can answer this now or in a follow-up, but I've got Stephen Thane, Terry Jestrin, it looks like, and Dorothy Moon. And I just wanted to check and see if I was looking in the right area to be able to also, sending the letters to the U.S. Forest Service is that's the biggest thing to try and especially with the environmental impact study. But, these legislatures have been involved in this process as well. This hasn't just been all done under the guise underneath the U.S. Forest Service. So, this went across many desks, under a dome in some Capitol building somewhere before this happened. And so I think, having an impact also sent to those legislatures, for me personally, has worked in the past, and I think it needs to be done as well. So I just want to see if you guys know or where we can find out for sure, get the email addresses and send letters to those people as well.
Yeah, that's such a great question, Thad. And it's a really important point. I think, we do have kind of all eyes focused right now on this public comment opportunity that we'll submit to the Forest Service, but contacting local legislators, county commissioners, Governor Brad Little is a critical part of the process, because for Midas to be able to start their project and operate their mine, it's not just a decision at the federal level. There are various permits they need from the state level. And so, contacting your local representative and up to Governor Brad Little is going to be really critical. I think, as far as I know, I might have to pass this to Caitlin or Ren, but I think that we're getting it set up so that you will be able to do that through IRU's website. Am I speaking the truth there, Caitlin?
Yes. Yeah. So we have put together a form on IRU's website where you can submit your comments directly to the Forest Service and to representatives in the Valley County area and to Governor Little. And you're also welcome to copy and paste it and share it with whomever you want to. But we will have it set up to go directly to a few of those key people.
Awesome. Okay, I'm just checking the chat box here to see if there's any questions that we haven't answered through the chat. Thank you for that, Caitlin. Oh, yes, Ren, what do we have?
There's one from Reagan. And what she asked is it wise to stick, what they asked, sorry, is it wise to stick with one subject per comment, such as like whitebark pine, bull, trout, endangered species, or should those be written in separate comments? You can include them all in one document. There's no problem with that at all. Honestly, IRU's organizational public comments have been several hundred pages before and include just a wide variety of topics. So there's no restriction in terms of really of length or topics that you can cover in your comments. So really, and you can submit multiple ones. If you go directly through the Forest Service website, you'll get an individual reference number. I know on the ones that we have a little bit of a limited capacity on our website in terms of submitting comments. So there will be kind of a word restriction. So if you have a really long comment, you may just want to go directly to the Forest Service website to submit it. But you can submit multiple, and each time you submit one, you'll get an individual reference number. That's not a problem.
Awesome, thank you, Ren. Another question I'm seeing here is relation into, it's from Lauren. What is the time frame for seeing Burnt Log Creek become eligible for wild and scenic, and how could this possibly impact the current plan for development? So yes, that's a really fantastic question. The wild and scenic stuff is kind of complicated. So as folks might know, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act is really our best tool that we have to protect rivers into perpetuity. And so the South Fork of the Salmon downstream, the stretch that Zach and Ben were alluding to, is a suitable wild and scenic stretch. And so that means the Forest Service has conducted various studies. And for a stretch of river to become wild and scenic, it has to be free flowing. It has to have one or more outstandingly remarkable value. And gosh, forgot the third part, but those are the two most important. In terms of Burnt Log Creek, there's 3 wild and scenic, eligible rivers that are potentially impacted by this project. One is Burnt Log Creek on the Burnt Log route. So that's that road, the mine access road that they will use after about year 2 or 3. Johnson Creek is also a wild and scenic eligible stream. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the South Fork, the main stem of the South Fork, is a suitable wild and scenic. And so the process for a river to go from being free and flowing and outstanding to being a designated river, first the Forest Service within a national forest area will conduct a survey. They will find which are the rivers and streams that have those qualities that I talked about, the wild and scenic qualities. They'll make an inventory of those rivers. They're now basically considered eligible. The Forest Service has to manage those rivers to protect their free-flowing status, their water quality, and also the outstandingly remarkable values that are particular to that river. And the next step in the process is the Forest Service conducts what's called a suitability study. And that's kind of a little bit more subjective, where they say, okay, this river is eligible, but considering the other potential uses of this area, is this river suitable, and should it be recommended to Congress? Because it's a congressionally authorized designation. Basically, Congress has to put their stamp on it, say this is a wild and scenic river. And so what are the major risks that we're seeing in this process in terms of impacts to these wild and scenic eligible streams is that the Forest Service is proposing that because the Stibnite Gold Project will potentially negatively impact these wild and scenic eligible streams like Burnt Log Creek, because Burnt Log Creek would be crossed by this heavy mining traffic. There'd be noise impacts, sedimentation from road construction, impacts to the fisheries qualities, that the Forest Service is saying, well, we have to make a decision now on whether Burnt Log Creek is suitable. We know it's eligible, but is it suitable? So the Forest Service is proposing that for both Johnson Creek and for Burnt Log Creek, that they will make a suitability determination of those 2 rivers. If they say these rivers are not suitable, then that means they're no longer eligible. They don't have to be protected as a potential wild and scenic river. So that's the major risk that we're seeing here. And in terms of the time frame, suitability analysis, the perspective of Idaho Rivers United is that it's Congress that actually initiates a suit. We believe the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act says Congress has to decide what rivers will be studied. The Forest Service, they kind of waver back and forth, and sometimes they decide when they're going to conduct the suitability study. And so what we're seeing through this is there is potential before the Stibnite Gold Project commences, that Burnt Log Creek and Johnson Creek will lose their wild and scenic eligibility status for the green light for the Stibnite Gold Project. So that's a really important point to put into your comments. We'll certainly put that in our in basically our fact sheet that we share with you all. Great question, thank you. All right, are there any others? Let's see here, Caitlin and Ren, that you've seen come in terms of questions? Okay, Reagan, great. So yeah, along those lines of the wild and scenic talk, how does this affect South Salmon eligibility? So the South Fork of the Salmon has already been determined to be suitable. So that's, as I mentioned before, there's the eligibility, a wild and scenic eligible river, and then in between, and then the next step would be a suitability study. And then from there, the Forest Service would recommend designation, that Congress consider it for designation. So Burnt Log Creek, Johnson Creek are eligible. The South Fork salmon is suitable. So it's undergone that suitability analysis. It's basically just awaiting congressional designation. So the Stibnite Gold Project cannot, under the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, impact the free-flowing status, the water quality, and the outstandingly remarkable values of the South Fork of the Salmon. So this is the main stem that's downstream. It's, you know, the confluence of the CSESH downstream. And so the issue that we're finding in the environmental impact statement is that they're basically saying, the Forest Service is saying that they're not anticipating any adverse impacts to water quality because Midas proposes to treat contaminated water into perpetuity. So water flowing out from the project won't be compromised. But there is the scientific community that's been studying this has a different opinion that we'll be submitting in our comments. So we'll make sure to share that info with you folks. Okay, Ricky has a great question. The water treatment into perpetuity. What's the plan to pay for it? That's a good question. Well, they plan to make quite a bit of money off of this project. So yeah, they're saying that it will be a privately funded by Midas Gold Corporation, and all of their investors will pay for the water treatment into perpetuity. There are a couple of questions around that. You know, first is, you know, Midas in their current proposal, you know, they're proposing about a 12 to 15-year operation cycle, and then basically a closure and reclamation period, and then the water treatment in perpetuity. What's also in the project proposal is additional exploration. And so what we have the potential to see is that while Midas Gold is conducting operations, that through their additional exploration, they find more minerals of value and propose submit another proposal to expand the footprint of the mine. And so, but what Midas is saying is that no problem, we'll be paying for water treatment into perpetuity. And so what that will mean is that the treatment, the chemicals that need to go into the site will be trucked in to the site, you know, basically into the foreseeable future. So yeah, that's the best I can answer that. Kendra has a great question. So would underground mining be part of an extension after the initial 15 to 20 years? Gosh, Kendra, I don't know. You might be able to answer that better than I can. If you have an answer to that, drop it in the chat box so that I can answer that properly. So yeah, I'm really just familiar with their proposal to do additional exploration. And you know, for part of the reason that we are hosting this event is we want to make sure we're getting factual information to folks. Often, you know, and this is not a personal attack upon Midas Gold, but you know, from Midas Gold's end, often what they tell folks is that they're going to go in, do a little bit of mining, put some gold in their pocket, clean everything up to better than it was before, and you know, and head back home, and everybody's happy. But what we're seeing is that there are potential plans for expanding the footprint of the mine if additional exploration finds that would be economically feasible. So what they are telling the public is not necessarily true. Okay, so just gonna take a look here, see what else we have. Yeah, another question here is, would it help to comment on the economic impact of not having this mine here? For example, we as a business moved to McCall for proximity to fishing, and I'm sure a lot of people moved to Idaho, in this region in particular, for the great access to the outdoors. No mine equals more money for outdoor recreation. That is such an incredibly important point, and I wish that we had had a little more time this evening to speak to that. But yeah, certainly, you know, Idaho, as we all know, is a fast-growing state. people aren't moving here for the mining potential. People are moving here for the public lands and clean water. And our outdoor recreation industry is huge. It's recently the Outdoor Industry Association released a report recently that that the value of our outdoor rec economy rivals the size of agriculture, and it weighs in at about $7 billion of economic output every year. And so it's a major job creator. And for folks like those that commented here, they moved here and started a business close to fishing and that they rely on these sorts of resources. That's a really important thing to emphasize, not only for this public comment period to the Forest Service and say, hey, this issue was not raised in the draft environmental impact statement. How is this going to affect my business? How is this going to affect recreational users? They were completely ignored in the draft environmental impact statement. In addition to that, writing Governor Brad Little a personal letter about your concern, I think would be of tremendous impact. Brad Little, though he hasn't been vocal out front, has certainly been supportive of this project, and assisted in basically the Stibnite Gold Project getting a critical infrastructure project designation, which means that it's being fast-tracked through the federal permitting process. And so I think we need to hold our elected officials accountable and certainly let them know that you're concerned about impacts to outdoor recreation, because for me personally, I think that's the future of Idaho. I think it's a growing industry, and things that we do that would compromise that, we need to raise that concern to our legislators. So great point and question. Yeah. Okay, let's see here, seeing if there's any more. All such awesome questions. So I really appreciate everybody being so engaged in this issue. Yeah, okay, so Kendra mentioned, related to the underground mining question. Yeah, so it's mentioned briefly, but not in much detail. So that's another great thing to point out in the DEIS. Okay, I'm not seeing, unless I'm missing a question, somebody wants to retype it in there. I think that we maybe have, yeah.
Reese, there was one from Zach saying, does signing the community agreement bind communities to cleanup costs? Is that correct? Do we know?
Gosh, Zach, maybe you could, so the community agreement, are you referring to the community agreement that Midas proposed to have McCall sign? Yeah, I don't think I'll be able to answer that question. I think, well, I'll admit I'm relatively new to this effort. I've had it on my radar for a while, but being new to Idaho Rivers United since the start of the year, some of these things kind of were happening before I started. So I don't know the history there. I'd love if you'd speak to it a little bit, maybe if you have any points to make there, Zach.
Can you hear me? I don't want to speak too much on that because I don't want to spread any misinformation here, but yeah, I think they sent that out 3 years ago now, and every city in Valley County, with the exception of McCall, has signed it. And I believe, yeah, again, I don't want to spread any misinformation, but we should look into that and maybe revisit that, because I do believe that is one of the components to the agreement.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Midas has made a tremendous effort to form partnerships with communities, municipalities, businesses, individuals, and and they've done a pretty good job at it. We've got to be honest. In terms of concerns for cleanup costs to the project. Basically mining companies are mandated by law to provide financial assurances for cleanup costs. So in the event that there was some major spill or issue, they have to say upfront, basically sign an IOU saying, we have the assets to cover any future cleanup costs in the event that we're no longer around as a company to be there. The risks associated with that are that history has shown that mining companies can go bankrupt. Say there's some crazy fluctuation in the price of gold, or something happens, something catastrophic happens on site, and the company goes bankrupt. Taxpayers end up getting left the bill. We've seen that happen with major mine projects in Colorado, Montana, and for that reason, citizens in Montana organized to ban cyanide leach mining in the state of Montana in the 90s, and it's been upheld in the Montana Supreme Court multiple times, and that's because they've experienced it. And the question that we've posed, in blogs we've written IRU is like, do we have to wait for a major spill or a cyanide spill or a major event to happen before we consider, the impacts of mining to our state? Because Idaho is known as a mining-friendly state. In terms of Midas's role with the financial assurances, they've lobbied pretty intensely at the state level to adjust the regulations. It was heavy debate, a lot of organizations involved, and as far as I know, those rules for financial assurances are pretty robust, but it's an ongoing negotiation. And the risk is that Midas Gold lobbied to have what are called corporate guarantees allowed as a form of financial assurance, which is basically an IOU, rather than actually having to provide real tangible assets. It's basically just we will pay for cleanup. It's a guarantee on our corporation. So there's some serious concerns along that side. And so yeah, that's a great point, Zach. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, so let's see here. Questions are still rolling in. For those that are here, I'm so glad folks are still sticking with us. So a question from Susan is, what is the benefit of this project? Why would Little be trying to push for this? Well, I think, on paper, Midas Gold's proposal, it will create short-term jobs, for 20 years. It create good wage jobs for people, and in an economically depressed area, certainly. So yeah, there are some benefits associated with short-term mining proposal. In addition to that, I think on paper their proposal to restore the site without additional investigation and looking at the plans with a microscope looks pretty good. I think for somebody who's not an expert in these things, we look at it and say, hey, yeah, I see there's contamination up there. So you're going to come in and create jobs and clean the place up and then head out of town. That sounds good. So I can see, I can certainly see from Brad Little's perspective, how he could come to a position of support for a project like this. That's why I think we as a community need to share with Brad Little and other decision makers another perspective on this project. And I don't know if he has heard as much from our community as he has heard from Midas and folks that are in support of the project. So that would be my thoughts on that in a nutshell. Okay, let's see here if there's any other, some great dialogue happening in the chat box. So yeah, keep it up, folks. See if there's any other questions that come in. We'll hang out here for a few.
Reese, someone on Facebook asked, is there any steps that they can take to help get the East Fork considered for suitability for wild and scenic?
Yeah, gosh, that's a really great question. I think, it's certainly worth including in your comments to the Forest Service that the East Fork in particular, because it hasn't been considered eligible for wild and scenic status, that it certainly should be. As we've seen from some of our guest tonight photos and stories of the East Fork or the South Fork, is that it truly is it is outstandingly remarkable in terms of its values, as the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act would put it. And it is free flowing. It is free flowing. So it contains the criteria. I think, certainly letters to the Forest Service. Usually the Forest Service conducts these eligibility studies when they're doing a plan revision. And I think we will see that here within probably the next 5 years. Somebody else might be able to comment to that better, but I believe the last plan revision for the Payette National Forest was in 2010, 2003. Zach, can you speak to that?
I believe it was 4 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, it might be a little while until we see a plan revision process, which is that's when the Forest Service has to conduct an inventory. But I think it's certainly worth putting pressure on Payette National Forest to consider adding the East Fork, South Fork in particular, as an eligible stream, so that it affords those protections. All right, any more questions? Oh, we do have another question. What should a person avoid saying? We'll have a comment thrown out. No, it's great. It's great to have a lot of questions here. I think, just kind of reflecting back, Ren, maybe if you want to speak to that, because you know the criteria the best.
Yeah, there isn't really necessarily, so long as your comment meets the criteria of substantive, it's not going to get thrown out. So you can always throw in, that's where, we always encourage people, this is usually part of my public comment spiel, you can include as much personal narrative and things like that, so long as you do include something that is substantive, because it is kind of considered like a whole, like your letter is considered your comment. So, it's as long as you have substantive information in there, it should be good.
Thanks, Ren. Well, I think looking at the clock here, folks, I think we should wrap it up. Certainly, send us an email and follow up with everyone. I want to send a huge thank you to our guests, Thad Robison, Zach Sears, and Ben Stokesbury. So valuable to have your voices on here, and thank you for being advocates for the South Fork of the Salmon and getting folks engaged. It's really a pleasure to have you on here tonight. So, and to all the folks that joined as participants, thank you so much for engaging this issue. Please stay in touch with Idaho Rivers United, and please send us any questions that you have, and make sure you send in your public comment before that deadline on October 28th. I will say too, Idaho Conservation League is going to be hosting a webinar next week if you're just ready to keep on with this. And I believe we're going to hear from a representative from the Nez Perce tribe, and that's going to be on the evening of the 20th. And so follow Idaho Conservation League to get info of how to sign up for that. Definitely encourage you to join that discussion. And in addition, Caitlin, I think you've got to mention some things about upcoming Idaho Rivers United events.
Yeah, thanks, Reese. So as an organization, Idaho Rivers United is funded by memberships and donations and grants, and that allows us to do this work that we do, protecting and advocating for our rivers. And on Thursday, October 15th, our annual auction is beginning. And normally this would be an in-person one-night event, but this year it is online. and it'll run for 8 days. So it starts Thursday the 15th, it ends Friday the 23rd, and we have some awesome auction items. We've got some trips on the main salmon, some trips on the lock saw, a raft, paddleboard, lots of really exciting things that'll be up for bid, and all the proceeds go right to Idaho Rivers United and allow us to continue this work. So check that out on the Idaho Rivers United website, and we'll include a link in the email we send tomorrow as well. We're doing a Zoom on Thursday, like a virtual happy hour to kick off the auction with some of our brewery partners. And then next Friday, we'll have another Zoom to wrap up the auction with raffle prizes and lots of fun things. We've got a fun conservation video to share with you all where we talk a little bit more about Stibnite. So if you're around, join us for that and check out the auction.
Sounds good. With that, I think we should sign off, folks. So thanks so much again, and stay in touch with Idaho Rivers United.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. And for those of you on Facebook, if you want to get the email with the information on Stibnite Mine, the fact sheet, the comment link, just send us an email at admin@idahorivers.org. So it's just admin@idahorivers.org. Thanks, guys.